Hello everyone, my name is Alicia Domínguez and I am an English philologist with a deep interest in Gothic literature, neuroscience and psychology. As a supernatural fan, a mother and someone who loves figuring out what goes on in our minds, I am always looking for ways of connecting the pieces between the outside world and what goes on inside our heads as individuals, but also collectively through TV shows, films and literature. And this is what I'm going to do today through this essay called Archetypes of the Sea and the Unconscious Mind in the TV show Supernatural. But before I start talking to you about this episode and its relevance with the sea and our unconscious, I want to reflect on the following initial thoughts. Just like a baby inside its mother's womb, humans were not aware of themselves and the world around them until they had to feed themselves, find shelter, and survive different dangers. And just as babies do, they perceive nature and themselves as part of the same thing. When they started becoming aware about the world around them and they experienced life, they became storytellers around the campfires at night. They told stories that could explain the seasons, day, night, earth, and water, but also feelings like love and experiences like birth and death. This is how myths were born, full of symbols and archetypes, and with them, they developed what we know now as consciousness. However, as we developed our consciousness and started building civilizations, we also started detaching ourselves from nature and put it at our service, exploiting it and relegating our myths to the plane of entertainment. We began to live more in the outside world and ignored what was happening in our unconscious minds. We ignored intuition and we neglected relationships. We became split from the world that we once respected and were part of. But like a baby when it is split from its mother, by separating ourselves from our origins, the split took place also within ourselves. And it was that within that split, we went coming back to nature, like the Romantics did when during the Enlightenment, they saw danger in being too rational and neglecting emotions. When they talked about the sublime, they didn't realize that nature kept swallowing them up in their imaginations through the densities of its woods and the depths of its waters. It was tapping into their unconscious minds. That initial fascination is still with us. Despite having enslaved nature to please us and almost destroying ourselves in the process, we're still unavoidably drawn and scared by old myths of the sea and its uncanny creatures that continue lurking in our imaginations and invading our literature and TV shows with new productions. And we keep doing this because we're still looking for answers to understand better what goes on inside our unconscious minds. We intuitively know that the answers are there in our origins. Even our bodies are vessels that replicate nature. The amniotic fluid in our mother's womb is like the sea that nourishes us but can also swallow us forever. There is still much going on in the sea and in our bodies that we don't understand. The sea keeps surprising us with new information about its depths, but also with new creatures that trigger our imaginations, making us revisit old myths and readapting them to our new realities. And this is what I am aiming to do in this paper today. Through the analysis of the episode Sex and Violence from the TV show Supernatural, I will focus on the evolution of the siren, a hybrid human-like sea creature that represents a liminal Gothic order through which the main characters meet their shadows. But to understand its origin and evolution, I will use a Jungian approach to address the archetype of the sea and that of the Grey Mother, as they both contain, nurture, birth, and keep reshaping traditional creatures to adapt to the necessities of our collective unconscious. Psychiatrist and analytical psychologist Carl G. Jung talked about humanity and its symbols, and in the process, collided with the iceberg of the unconscious mind and its archetypes, saying that our psyche is part of nature and its enigma is as limitless. For those who are not very familiar with Jung, I am going to start by defining a few concepts that will help understand how they interact in Supernatural's episode Sex and Violence from Season 4. Jung talked about archetypes to describe the way our psyche organizes abstract information that is innate in us. The use of archetypes helps us shape the abstract concepts and images in our mind, so we understand better our inner world. Why we react in a certain way or another, what makes us angry, scared, what triggers certain action in different situations are some of the uses of the archetypes. The most ancient archetype that contains all of the others is that of the Grey Mother, which Jung connected with the sea. He said, "The sea is a favorite symbol for the unconscious, the mother of all that lives." As we learn from Erich Neumann in his book The Grey Mother, water is undifferentiated and elementary and is often uroboric, that is, represented as a snake biting its own tail, representing circularity. It contains male elements side by side with the maternal elements such as flowing and moving waters that can be seen not just on the sea but also in streams, and that can be bisexual and male, an aspect that is very important for this essay. There's a part of this archetype that is not part of the unconscious mind and that is learned consciously instead. In the past, it was learned through storytelling. In Supernatural, this learning of the archetype is learned through the search of the lore by the information provided by the external world, through social media and through people's journals, mainly that of John Winchester, the father of Dean and Sam Winchester. If the archetype of the Grey Mother can be considered the first archetype, this means that it contains all the different symbols that make our world what it is today. In Gothic terms, these are the binomials day versus night, good versus evil, man versus woman, that together can be united forming loops, but that can also generate separate ways. This is exactly what happens inside of us. The split occurs when there is a disconnection between our consciousness and unconsciousness. Denying the latter will be like denying nature, our origin, and therefore become unbalanced. Symbols function similarly to the archetype, as they both have a dynamic and a material component that guarantees awareness in the individual and serves as an energy transformer and at the same time a molder of consciousness. This is what Erich Neumann says. Humans feel curiosity about the symbol, and one of the symbols of the sea is the siren. In episode Sex and Violence of Supernatural, the siren is a Dionysiac quest for love and pleasure. And it does this by luring its victims into committing crimes against their loved ones in order to be with him or her. This allows the siren to stay constantly on the top of the love climax. Once it is satisfied, it moves on to another victim to start all over again, leaving behind a lot of deaths. The siren lures its victims not through the traditional singing, as we can see in the story of Odysseus, who asks to be tied to the mast so he can listen to the sirens while passing the island of the sirens, but by spitting venom at his victims all through its saliva. In the original text, sirens were not described. In the 3rd century, they were depicted as creatures with the head of a woman, the body of a bird, and scaly feet in some texts, and in other texts were more like mermaids or tritonesses. The first time we see a siren addressed to as a mermaid is in the Anglo-Latin catalogue Liber Monstrorum from the 8th century. In Supernatural, the venom from the siren works its way down to the character's unconscious mind, where their repressed traumas are, and by bringing to the surface their inner desire in such a way they lose contact with their usual selves. The first victim is Adam Benson, a married man who kills his wife after she asks him why he's late, and then informs him that she has accepted an invitation to go out on Saturday. He becomes very angry and kills his wife. The second victim is Lenny Bristol, a young man who looks after his disabled mother and who falls in love with a stripper, Belle, who after having intercourse with him says that to be with him forever he will have to kill his mother, and so he does. The next victims will be the two brothers, and here we have to stop a moment. We must remember that sirens and mermaids are slightly different. The siren is the one that takes men to their death, whereas mermaids help sailors to get safe to the shore. We usually think about sirens as female beings, but sirens were originally male and female. The male version disappeared around the 5th century. There are a couple of interesting things here too. On the one hand, in the film adaptation of the Odyssey, Ulysses in 1954, we don't see the sirens. We only hear how they beg Ulysses to stay with them by making him believe he's already at home, but we never really see them. Another important aspect is that the voices of the sirens are those of Penelope, Ulysses' wife, and Telemachus, his son. So we have a male and a female voice. Since most people probably only think of the siren as a female being, it comes as a surprise when the siren appears in Supernatural in the form of the ideal brother first to Dean and then to Sam, recuperating like this the old tradition of the siren as both male and female. But not only this, by using a bisexual siren, the show also shades light onto the different gender voices mirroring our modern societies and moves the focus away from the siren sexuality and puts it into the unconscious needs of human nature. The siren appears under the shape of Nick Munro, an FBI agent also investigating the deaths of the two men at the start of the episode, and who little by little gets close enough to Dean to be able to poison him drinking from Dean's hip flask. After he has done so, he tells him he cannot trust his brother, who seems to be getting in the way of the investigation. Nick knows by now that the brothers are going through a rough moment where they are not trusting each other. From Sam, Dean hates the little stuff, the lies, the secrets, and tells Sam they used to be in this together, that they used to have each other's backs. When Sam gets poisoned by Nick, this time in a more violent way as Nick spits the venom directly on his face, he says to Dean that he didn't tell him about Ruby and how to hunt down Lilith because he considers him too weak to go after her, that Dean is holding him back and therefore that he's a better hunter than him, stronger, smarter, and that he's too scared to take out demons. Sam also brings out that Dean has been too busy lately sitting around feeling sorry for himself and whining about all the souls he tortured in hell. That's how Dean gets wound up and almost kills Sam with an axe from the hotel room if Bobby hadn't stopped him in time. At first glance, the first two cases might look different from that of Sam and Dean, but at their core they are the same. In the first case, we have an allegedly happily married man who kills his wife with a metal meat tenderizer. Then we learn that he's been having an affair. From the couple's conversation at the start, he looks like the sole provider who works until late, and the only pleasure and excitement he gets from his married life is out of the plans his wife makes for him. In the second case, we have a young man who kills his mother as she's a burden for him because he needs to look after her. For Dean, but also for Sam, they have a deep desire to be understood and accepted by the other. Dean wants a brother that doesn't lie to him, who shares his musical taste, food, and hobbies. For Sam, it is all about finding an equal who follows him without questioning his ways. Through these examples, we see a clear sample of our society where there is a big disconnection in our superficial relationships with our beloved ones, but also within ourselves. What we are repressing is what the siren uses to its own advantage. The more disconnected we are, the darker we become, and the darker we become, the easier it is for us to snap. As an archetype of instant pleasure, quick infatuation, and eternal happiness, the siren is also a symbol of the sea, overused and perpetually otherized. It presents itself in the show as limitless and eternal, but also very similar to us, physically and psychologically. I was getting bored and wanted to fall in love again and again and again. This is what Nick says, which at the same time tells us all about our psychic system. Obviously, this is not happening at a conscious level, but rather unconsciously. As a characteristic of being humans, we always look to reconnect with that original peace and communion we had with nature. And if the siren is a symbol of the Great Mother archetype, then this filial connection happens at the level of our ego. Since the duality of good and evil is what the Great Mother archetype holds in itself, there is a clash between our consciousness and our unconsciousness when they are forced to talk to each other through the process of shadow work, which is what Dean and Sam are forced to do under the influence of the venom. The more disconnected both brothers are from their real instincts, feelings, and thoughts, the more menacing they are to themselves and to others. The fact that the siren can shift and in so doing disappear from people's lives tells us about its paradoxical nature. It can neither be visualized nor represented. Since we have grown to manipulate nature, and our own consciousness, the symbol of the siren as a representative of the vast sea has lost its luminosity. It becomes monstrous and inhuman, as we see here. In this sense, the siren has become both a part of our consciousness, as it can be touched, felt, and killed, but at the same time it anchors itself with that ancient part of our own consciousness we can relate to. It shows itself as the characters want to see it, rather than how it was once depicted by the first ancient myths. In fairy tales such as The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen, the mermaid suffers all the power of a patriarchal society, losing her freedom and her life, precisely because her voice has been taken from her, literally. In this changing power of the symbol, the brothers wake up from the trance being aware of what has been said and done. They have shined light on their shadows, and there's no coming back from that. They go from being blind about each other's real intentions and their own to becoming aware of their new reality. In Jungian terms, the siren, like the demon, is not regarded as part of the man to whom he appears, but as being who is present and active in the outside world. It is also interesting how it only appears to men, which take us back to how in patriarchal society men still see the Great Mother as a threat, rather than as a source of information, nourishment, and the origin of everything that makes us human. In this sense, the siren is an internal element rooted in our mythological past that, once outside, as in the case of supernatural, becomes the means for the brothers to project onto each other their inner traumas and anxieties. The siren, like the Gorgon, is a projection of the terrible mother, as it leads men to death, both in mythological terms and in the real world. In this case, they don't get to die, but acknowledging and facing what they have said to each other is a form of death, as the brothers have to reveal their relationship from the new consciousness. They have assimilated part of the archetype, and now they have to digest it. The siren, as many other mythological creatures or monsters that appear in the show, has a transformative characteristic that will help the two heroes continue their journey together. And as final thoughts, after doing this research in this paper, I would like to say that, in my opinion, myths have always played an important role in our lives, as they helped us explain the world we live in, but also learn more about our unconscious minds. The siren is probably one of the myths that keeps being reused and readapted in the cinema and TV, but also in literature. As a symbol of the sea and that of the archetype of the Great Mother, its message is very important in a patriarchal society where everything that is not male is still otherized. Supernatural is probably one of the modern productions capable of readapting old myths and deconstructing them so they show a deeper psychological reading within. There's a lot more I could have said about the sea itself in connection with our unconscious minds, but by analyzing the siren in this episode of Sex and Violence, I hope I have brought some awareness regarding our connection with nature, and more specifically the sea, and what that can tell us about ourselves. So I hope you have enjoyed this paper, and I'll be waiting for your questions if you have any, and that you are encouraged to watch some Supernatural, the whole series, if you haven't done yet. Thank you very much.